Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Soy Advisor. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, coming to you again from West Central Illinois, where it's definitely hot. Capitalize HOT, which I'm sure is the big storyline. It's dry and hot these next 2 weeks, looking at the weather forecast, and we'll get to that in a second. Here in Knox County, we did get an inch of rain last Thursday, which if you were here or listening, I said it could either be a tenth or an inch, hoping for an inch. And we had some flash flooding in some areas. It came down real quick, real fast. There was places flooded. There's some places where it just soaked right in, just depending on where you were at. So before we go around and get our regional updates, let's look at what the USDA released yesterday in terms of crop conditions as of June 16th. So soybeans planted nearly there, 93%, emerged at 85%. Corn planted at 97%, emerged at 93%. In terms of crop ratings, we did see some changes there. Soybeans saw an increase in the lower ratings with 2% very poor and 7% poor, while 30% were fair, 50% good, and 11% excellent. Corn ratings also shifted this week with 1% very poor, 5% poor, 29% fair, 52% good, and 13% excellent. So overall, both soybeans and corn showed a decline in their excellent and good categories with an increase in the poor and very poor ratings this week. And I think these shifts reflect with what some are seeing out in the fields, and we'll get to that. Real quick, winter wheat harvested 53% compared just to the 6% last week. I think we were all guessing that was going to jump. Condition ratings for wheat, 22% fair, 61% good, and 16% excellent. Drought monitor will be released Thursday morning. And as I mentioned last week, some regions in central Illinois experiencing abnormally dry conditions. So we'll see how that changes. So what are you seeing out in the fields? Are these conditions dropping in front of your eyes? Are you not seeing it? Let's go ahead and get started. Stephanie, you want to tell us? You went on a little road trip yesterday throughout Illinois, so you can tell us what you saw.
Well, yeah, this week we'll be on a big road trip. So we'll be all over Illinois. So we'll go down to the south for our Rend Lake for our field day on Thursday. And then we're going to be heading to Western Illinois, Augusta, as a team. Today we'll be heading to Bloomington to the ISA office. And then yesterday I was in the Livingston County area near Pontiac, that area. The particular farmer that called me was having some emergence issues with beans and has been for the last couple years. And from what I see, it was pretty bad, and I think it was slugs. So I it's becoming harder and harder to tell now. But some of the later planted and things that he didn't use a rotary hoe on, I could really tell. And so it's interesting because now it's growing out of it in some certain areas, and then you can see it's pretty spotty in some other areas. So I think not only in the north, but resiliently in the south up until, it got hot, they were complaining about slug issues and replanting a lot, not just corn or not just soybeans, but also corn in the south. And so with the mild winter, and then the cool, wet temperatures, those slugs just thrived. Sometimes they can be hard to find because they're at night. And I heard a lot of complaints about those. And normally they would, in a normal year, we say that every year, in a normal year, they'd be gone by now. Luckily with, maybe unluckily, but luckily with this heat, the sun, dry weather that we're getting, they won't have to worry about that. We'll move on to the next issue. So I guess in my area, corn is V8, V6. We're going to be tasseling here soon. I mean, with the heat, I think it's going to be sooner than later in a couple weeks. We're going to be heading out on a family vacation. I have a feeling when we come back, we might be tasseling here in a bit. And yesterday, when I was in that Livingston County area, quite a bit behind that. So think V5 corn and VE soybeans around there. So That's what I saw. Nothing else major sticking out at this point in time. I'm not really finding anything else.
How's that crop looking in that area? Would you say it's decent?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
On my drive up from Christian County up to Livingston County, I would say, the crop looks good. I was kind of visited Craig yesterday too. I would say in that Stonington area where Craig was, it looks really good. Some of the best beans I've seen so far until we go on our, trip around the state this week. But there's also certain fields where you can really see that are struggling every once in a while that I'm assuming that they mudded in, and I'm seeing the compaction on the edge of the fields. And you can see patterns within the fields where the corn, has the pointier leaves. It looks like it's drought stressed and so on. So I am seeing every once in a while a field that looks like that, but it's not a lot.
Thank you, Stephanie. Speaking of Craig, what's going on in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I would agree that you get up a little bit northern Illinois. I went last week, and it just looks a lot more uniform up there than it does in some of the other areas that I've visited. Central Illinois, they just looks like they got a little bit bigger windows to get things in, and a little bit of more uniformity. They still have the variation on crop growth stages and such. Um, like Stephanie mentioned, you're starting to see in the corners of fields or compacted areas, you're starting to see some rolling, and that would indicate some stressed plants based probably likely due to, lack of roots. Um, I did see a couple Japanese beetles yesterday while I was doing the video shoot. I had one on my shirt when I got back to the office, so they're out there. I don't know if people have reported that yet, but they're starting to show up. The other thing that was interesting yesterday that is probably pretty unique for us, but may happen since we've got some guys with some corn that's not quite as far along as the V8 corn, as we had some floppy corn. So it's where it's just dried out on the top of the ground, and there's just really no nodal roots there to hold it up. And these are on inbreds, but I know there's some hybrids out there that are probably in those later planted fields. It'd be worth looking to see if you see any of that. Not much you can do other than get a rain or irrigate, but Central Illinois, there's not a lot of irrigation. So it was kind of a unique thing, but definitely happened and something to look for, I guess, if you've got some corn that's a lot smaller than the typical probably V8 corn that most areas seeing now. So yeah, there's a widespread. The other thing I would mention, with the widespread of crop growth stages is just keeping an eye on the pests, because you have one field out there that starts silking, it's going to be a magnet for things. And same thing with other pests. You might be in a unique situation in your area. So, but yeah, no other things to see. We did see some herbicide carryover, I think, in the field we were in with Stephanie, but it's hard to say because the where that's at in the field, it's kind of a unique spot because it could be some overlap, could likely be where they overlap from last year. So we're looking into that, but I don't think it's a widespread concern. It's kind of a unique thing. So be good to get some pictures though. So
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Craig. Shelby, over
yep.
in Champaign.
Good morning. Over here in South or East Central Illinois, last Friday we ended up receiving anything from about a half inch to an inch and a half of rain in this territory, which really was a nice relief headed into this heat wave that we have. But we also had a lot of wind with that storm. There was some pretty good twisting on some standing corn. For the most part, it all came out of it. I did see some seed corn fields that were probably V4 that were still kind of twisted yesterday. So still some effects from that still out there, and maybe this cool weather that we're actually receiving this morning. I say cool just because it's cloudy and overcast, and we did receive a little bit of drizzle this morning, and they actually lowered the temperature for the high for today, so that'll be a little bit of a relief down to 89, not 95. So just a slight relief. Lots of variability in plant height, which to be expected because we have everything from just planted corn and soybeans to V4 soybeans and B6 or 7 corn in the area. I drove to Indianapolis on Thursday and Friday, and again, all the way across the area, just tons of variability. This is probably the wettest territory, like for wet holes and things like that, just with the rains that we've received. So a lot of variability just in fields in this territory, whereas you just have different plant heights across different fields as you go different directions. Couple things. I think the corn this year, really noticed yesterday that we really didn't go through that ugly stage of the transition from your nodal roots to the primary root system in corn. I think it almost jumped that. We had enough moisture and just enough heat that we were growing fast enough. Things kind of jumped. Didn't notice that like we normally do. You get the deficiency effects that you normally see in corn. Didn't happen to see that this year. You're starting to see, though, with this heat, the sins of planting. A lot of stuff went in wet, so and in unideal conditions. So you're starting to see that across the board, corn and soybeans, and even guys that tried to do it right. You can still see it. I mean, there just wasn't a perfect time to go this year unless you went early, surprisingly. So, little bit of scouting and soybeans and things. I want to remind guys that just because you have a post application, make sure you still scout after that application. Some of these weeds are getting really tall. Corn and soybeans, I did notice some water hemp in some corn the other day that was probably 12 inches tall. I'm guessing that probably won't die. So we need to scout after we have our post applications and make sure we're getting that controlled, because we've got a lot of season left, and as wet as it's been, we want to make sure those residuals hold for us. Little bit of wheat information I've heard in the area. It dried down extremely quick. I haven't heard any yields yet, but we went from 25% to about 12% within just a week or so. So this heat and humidity has really pushed that along. Wheat looks pretty decent, what I have seen, but haven't heard any official yield results yet. And I had noticed some stink bugs starting to show up in some different places. So start to keep some eye out for that. But other than that, that's kind of where I am.
Thanks, Shelby. Is there any flowering in soybeans in your area? I know Chris, ever since last year, he says he likes to have flowers on his birthday, meaning soybean flowers. Are you seeing any of that in your neck of the woods?
I have not. I've heard a couple reports that guys had seen them, so I would think they should be showing. I haven't dug in very tightly to look for sure, but Chris wasn't jumping for joy. June 1st, I don't think we had any at that point. A lot of small soybeans then, but I would say they should be showing now.
All right, thanks, Shelby. Eric, up to you. Oh, go ahead.
Craig's won the flower award so far that I know of.
Yes, saw that in his crop report. Eric, over to you.
Yeah, so since we're on the topic of flowers, in the areas that I cover, we've been flowering since about midweek, early week last week. That's when I really started noticing flowers on soybeans. So definitely a good sign. Very short soybeans, though, I will have to say that they're beginning to flower. They're very short, nowhere near close to closing in rows. Last week I did happen to come across kind of a unique scenario, and it's never a good day when you have to tell a farmer that the reason why his field looks the way it does is because it's the doing of his own hand. But actually came across some Group 15 herbicide injury on soybeans, and so the grower was just determined that it was actually Group 4 growth regulator injury because of the leaf strapping and everything. And he'd heard rumor that there was a farmer in the area that had been spraying dicamba in corn, which, I scouted around, couldn't find any dicamba, any injury in any local cornfields from the weed carcasses. And but it was very classic Group 15, and kind of the, just so everybody knows, kind of the telltale sign of a Group 15 versus a Group 14 is you'll get that heart-shaped leaf, and instead of the veins on the leaves, coming out to the end parallel, you'll see that. So anyways, just wanted to kind of call that out, that if you are maybe seeing growth regulator injury, maybe give it a second look, maybe group 15. So it's just something kind of I want to call out. But corn, like everybody else said, corn is very varying in height, really based around planting date. Last week we really started seeing corn roll, especially on some of those stressed acres. Just as Shelby mentioned, from all the sins of planting, that's really coming out now, all the sins of planting. And then really, I'm still diagnosing, anything that looks like deficiency symptoms, it's because of restricted root growth. So if you are seeing any type of deficiency symptoms, really, I encourage you to dig down and look at the roots for both corn and soybeans. I had one instance with one of my crop specialists, and actually thought there was maybe some iron or maybe even possibly some manganese deficiency. Well, they didn't have any tissue sampling supplies with them at the time. And then it was a few days later that they were able to come back and the field had changed, and got to looking at the roots. And sure enough, it was because of restricted root growth that why some of those deficiencies, and there had been a rain in between there. So I would just say, if you're thinking it's deficiency, I use this analogy a lot with my crop specialists and even my interns, but does the glove fit the hand? Really try to understand where the deficiencies are coming from and where the deficiencies are occurring on the plant. Just to have, because a lot of times that will tell you what deficiency it might is, because different nutrients show up on different parts of the plant, just like nitrogen a lot of times will show up low in the plant, whereas something like maybe iron or manganese can show up at the very tops of the leaf. So just, kind of having that understanding before you start just looking at pictures to try to diagnose something. And stink bugs still continue to be around. And I think earlier on, when I had made mention of, possibly seeing some corn borer feeding, I'm going to probably retract that statement. I'm going to say it's probably been stink bugs all along, now that I'm continuing to see more of it and looking at the patterns of it, and I can actually find the stink bugs. I really think that stink bugs have been around for quite some time, at least in probably southern Champaign County and Douglas County. They've definitely been around for a while.
I see everyone shaking their head. Yes, seeing that in, in other areas too.
About every field I've been in, I've seen that, and I've been looking for some sort of stalk borer or something. And like, nope, it's not it. But I'm guessing that's what it is too. Haven't seen the stink bug though.
Thanks, Eric. Great report from your area. Karen, in Central Illinois.
I spent most of last week in Fulton, Mason, Peoria, and Tazewell County as I did the Master Naturalist class. And driving back and forth, I noticed there was some rolling going on. Obviously, it wasn't every field. So again, I think it was those mistakes that were made at planting are now showing up. We did get an inch of rain last Thursday also. It got pretty hairy from like Lexington, Illinois over to Gibson City. I have some growers that have 40% green snap in some fields. Part of that could have been that some of the corn was very brittle because dicamba had been sprayed. But that area will be interesting to see how well it recovers. Outside of that, I think Eastern Iowa, kind of the DeWitt area along the river, that is probably where the breadbasket is at the moment. They've had some great conditions getting everything in, and they've had a rough few years prior to that. But so far, it seems to be where the better part is. The question I'm getting this week is, can I spray at night? It's too windy during the day. The soybeans are going to close. The rows will close within the next week. What'll happen. So those are kind of what we're looking at. So just a reminder, to read your labels. If you're in a stressed out condition, your surfactant rate might change in order to get a little bit better performance. So be cognizant of that. And again, just make sure you're using the right surfactant for the right products, because we've had some failures this spring using adjuvants that just weren't compatible with the active ingredients that were in the mixture.
And you're going to have a blog post out here pretty soon talking about that. So, little plug there. Thanks, Karen. Drew.
Yeah, not gonna have a whole lot riveting compared to everybody else. I would echo a lot of the same things that everybody else is seeing. When I look at that Route 80 and North Corridor, we had about 2/10 of an inch of rain here out of that rain on Thursday, which is very welcome. But everything up this way does look pretty good. We can't complain about too much at all. On soybeans to start with, we're seeing a lot of flowering kind of in that mid-April planting window, so April 15th range. We're starting to see some pretty regular flowering on those, especially if you're sub maybe 3.4 or something like that. We're really seeing a lot of flowering if you're later maturity than that. I haven't maybe seen it as much. But just remember that is R1, so that does match up with some of our herbicides. So just keep that in mind. We are still knocking a few things off of the bingo card as far as just odd things. I've got a field to look at that potentially has some wireworm feeding that had some shoddy emergence. At Stephanie had talked about still have some slug feeding that we're working through on some farms that have never had it before. Just again, this kind of this weird, unusual spring is still kind of dragging us along. And then as we get into corn, probably the biggest thing that I would mention is if you haven't sprayed your post application, which I know a lot of them have been done, just monitor the bag tag for your herbicide resistance. We're starting to get a lot of dead corn rolling in, to be completely honest, as far as misapplications of herbicide, thinking that it was tolerant to something that it wasn't. And we're starting to see more and more of that creep in throughout the territory. So just kind of keep that in mind and check with your seed suppliers to make sure that what you're ordering to spray that crop is tolerant to, because we're too late to have those issues. And then also we are seeing, just with a lot of the oils that we're using, very similar to what Karen said, we're starting to see a lot of crop responses there as well. So burnt leaves, booms heating up overnight, those kinds of things we are all kind of rearing their ugly heads here in the last week or so. But outside of that, a lot of the same points that everybody else has kind of mentioned.
Thanks, Drew. So looking at today's June 18th. Last week we kind of talked about fungicide or planning for fungicide, but looking at the calendar now and what's to come, hot and dry weather, what should farmers be looking at? What should be on the radar? I know we've said all along, a lot of variability in crop height, growth stages, everything's all over the place. So with everything being all over the place, it's hard to focus in on one thing. But with that consideration, out of everything that they have going on, do you have any recommendations or strategies that farmers should be thinking about in these next couple weeks with their crop, either corn or soybeans? You could pick one, or just overall.
I'm going to use the analogy of kind of watching the stock market with your 401k. It's not about the short game, it's about the long game. So I wouldn't get hung up on this week of weather, hot, dry weather. I would be looking at the long range. And I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but the weather activity in the Gulf has really picked up this week. And so if that means if we start getting storms and a lot of activity out of the Gulf, we could see a lot of stuff get blown up our way, because some of the storm predictions they've got right now, it looks like it's going to be picking up later this month into the 1st of July. There could be a lot of activity and the remnants of those storms coming right up to Mississippi River Valley. So I would just like to plug that in, that if we're all, looking at thinking that this week is doom and gloom because of how hot and dry it is, I would just say think of your 401k and about the long game and how you're going to get to harvest and how, your decisions maybe right now may impact at harvest by a knee-jerk reaction.
I guess for our farm at this point in time, the only disease that I'm worried about is tar spot. There's absolutely no other diseases out there that I can see. And with this weather, I don't know if there will be, but again, I've said this before, we thought that last year too. And I was very happy that we put a fungicide on when, we finally got that rain, about this, the saving grace rain for whenever corn was at pollination, because we did have tar spot start showing up on our farm. And so it has been showing up. If you've been paying attention to the Twitter or X sphere, in different, I guess, Iowa, as well as yesterday in Missouri, and of course that's only a couple lesions, so nothing to freak out about it at this time, but just keep an eye on that. Normally, I'm assuming it must have been when we had the cooler wet weather. It definitely probably infected then. Not now, of course, just to throw that out there, but just definitely to keep in mind that's a disease that you definitely have to get a handle on in order to protect you.
I actually told one of my farmers that she needed to go on vacation. It was time to stop looking and just go on vacation for a week and come back and start over. So luckily she had a trip planned, so she was on her way, but sometimes you just have to stop looking.
So the big question on our farm is, should let's see, on the Mother's Day planted beans, should those be sprayed before we leave on vacation? The April beans have already been sprayed, so it's just kind of like going in waves right now before we can, take that vacation.
I would say they'll be flowering before you get back, so I'd probably spray them.
Okay. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, use the old Roundup adage of spray early, spray often.
Anything else to add? Anything that we forgot? Anything that we didn't mention that you want to bring up to the group and to our farmer listeners?
Sometimes this dry weather is good for the crops. I mean, it makes our roots go down. We've had a lot of moisture, and so our roots have stayed on the top. So it's not a bad thing to have a little bit of stress and encourage root growth to go down. It's chasing that water that's down. Some of this heat is extreme, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. As long as we continue to get some rains, we're still kind of headed in the right direction. And if it gets hot and humid again, then just you have to evaluate your farm and your fields for that fungicide application and what's going to be best for your situation.
I mean, welcome to summer, right? We're just at the summer solstice. Someone said the other day, it is summer. I'm like, well, not officially yet, but it sure feels like it. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and end today's episode here. Thanks so much, everyone, again, for your input today. I will note for those listening, we won't have a podcast next week, but we'll be back the following week, the first week of July, with some updates of what's going on across the state. So again, thank you. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next time.